All right. So now you've spoken out a lot particularly lately, about the hypocrisy of what some would call the intellectual dark web people, the anti-woke conservatives, who all seem to have an Israel carve out for everything they believe. So Sam Harris, this just dropped. He illustrated what I think you're talking about as well as it's ever been illustrated. So let's take a look.
Reversing it. I mean, just imagine the Jews of Israel attempting to use their own women and children as human shields against Hamas on October 7th. Picture the attitudes of the Hamas fighters if they were confronted with that stratagem. I mean, it's impossible from either side. There's no way Hamas fighters would expect it to happen. There's no way the Israelis could do it. If they did it,
Hamas would think it's like they've hit the jackpot.
It would just be the most grotesque Monty Python skit you've ever seen. I mean, it is a masterpiece of moral surrealism. I mean, like all the Jews would die. And the jihadists would look at one another like, can you believe, what were they thinking? Like, they thought that was going to stop. But the whole point was to kill as many of them as possible, right? But the strategy only works to the degree that it does because there's this moral asymmetry in the value placed on innocent human life. And that asymmetry should matter to everyone, to all of Israel's critics, knowing that it works only because of the heightened civilized and civilizing sensitivities of a Western audience. What's amazingly cynical about this is the jihadists know that we care more about the lives of their children than they do. And they're consciously weaponizing that against us. And by us, I mean all of civilized humanity that is not part of a death cult that views it as a win to have people die in whatever numbers because they're going straight to paradise.
Now, of course, this is extremely bizarre, watching these people who present themselves as public intellectuals presenting these just insane arguments. We've been watching a genocide in real time for 10 months, 11 months now. And you're making the case that Israelis are much more concerned about innocent human life. We're seeing children starving to death, dying of disease, having no water. You're just, to get one terrorist, you're just bombing entire refugee camps. You're bombing the safe zones. How do you make an argument like that?
Yeah, he definitely hit there were three things he said in there from that clip that were just bonkers in reasoning. The first one being the Israelis don't use their children as human shields. No, it's that they do, actually, by their own definition of what a human shield is. It's not like the Palestinians are literally grabbing their children and running around with them in front of them as actual human shields. They're claiming because Hamas is embedded within the society, right, that the children are just automatically human shields. Well, every Israeli is an IDF member practically. So by that logic, if you're going to say, look, anybody whose military is a target, that's the entirety of the that's almost the entirety of the Israeli society. Right. That would be a target. And they do have their own bases built below Jerusalem. They've got bases that bunkers built all throughout that region underneath the human. So that's there. So that right there saying, well, the Israelis don't use human shields. It's like, no, you do it in the same exact way. You just, especially with conscription and everybody being an IDF target, right? Now you've put everybody at risk by doing that in Israel. The second thing that he says there with imagine if we did that, then they would just eradicate all the Jews. And then, but of course that would be the plan. So that's, and it's like, well, that's what you guys are literally doing.
Exactly.
You're calling them human shields, blowing them all up because your goal is to eradicate all of these people. Of course.
He's describing the actual tactics of Israel as some hypothetical, if the shoe were on the other foot and Hamas did this to you're describing what is going on. Yeah.
Saying that, well, it's genocidal. It would be genocidal thinking, but that's what they have. They have genocidal thinking. So they would just wipe us all off the face of the map with their genocidal thinking. It's like, well, okay, you've just described yourself. And then that last part about him saying, we care about children. They know we care about children. And so that's why they do this. And it's like, no, you don't care about children at all. That's why you do what you do, despite the fact. And then you just use as an excuse to do what you do. Well, they use kids as human shields. So what if all these kids died? Whoops, too bad for you. I mean, they're not even trying to get away from the bombing kids. This class, it's very interesting to see nearly 100% of the intellectual dark web have this. They suddenly, when it comes to Israel, their brain rots. I mean, Dave Rubin has blocked me on Twitter. He just thinks I'm terrible for it. It's just, they cannot see, for whatever reason, something about, and I don't know. Is it possible that they're all bought off? I think there's a real possibility that there is a lot of money flowing, and they know that if they make a criticism, that money will stop. And the reason I think that is because I was a guest. I'm not going to say which show it was, but I was a guest on a big show at one point, and I went to the studio, and we weren't even on air yet. And this was a couple of years ago after I had just come back from the West Bank, and I'd come back from the West Bank just a bit earlier, a couple of months. And I brought up Israel just in casual conversation with some of the producers. And they immediately said, we're pro-Israel here. We're really pro-Israel. Really, really, really pro-Israel. And they were dead serious. And it was very weird. It was like, what in the world? So they knew if they said anything different, the money would go away.
Right.
It wasn't even listening to what I had to say at all. It was just... And it was it felt artificial, like they weren't genuinely pro-Israel. They just were like, oh, no, we're pro-Israel here. We're pro-Israel. We super weird.
Well,
I think they're all bought.
Sorry, go ahead, Russell.
It seems like also, though, a lot of them, because I followed and appreciated a lot of the ideas of a lot of these people until October 7th. Because they always emphatically said, look, I'm one of those who feels that the idea that Western civilization is uniquely foul or uniquely prone to evil. I've always spoken against that as throwing out the baby with the bathwater. That you should take some of the best ideas, and that has tended to be their argument. And they have emphatically argued it's not that we're Western chauvinists, is that we're saying there are certain things in Western culture that should be preserved. And, that's something I agreed with. And after October 7th, their defense of Israel revealed them to just be bargain basement Western chauvinists. Well, they're a democracy in the Middle East, which they're not. They are protectors of Western values. Well, in the worst sense, sure. Yeah. I think that's part of it. I think it is partly what you're saying with some of them. I think there are some commentators who, Kim, there's a whole network of speaking engagements that a lot of people make their living off of. And a lot of it is controlled by that money. And if they start speaking about that, they're not going to get those gigs.
Yeah, I think it's mostly that. I got to say, I've got a lot of friends inside of the libertarian and the Republican sphere, and some of them my very, very close friends. And I just think that they are worried about opportunity loss. I don't think that they're necessarily getting, perhaps this one show was actually getting quite a bit of money and funding from a very pro-Israel Zionist source. So that's why they were really quick to say, no, we're pro-Israel. But I think the others, it's a form of being bought off, right? Because it's a lot, you're just going to lose. You're going to end up like Candace Owens, where you get shunned by everybody. Right, if you speak up, and that is what they're afraid of. And one thing I've always respected about the Republican side and the talkers on the right is they're business minded. They want to make money. Whereas on the left, it's always been hard to kind of get all of the leftists together to build something that's actually going to make money. It's more it's more activism. Being like an activist journalist rather than. And so a lot of these other guys are actually trying to make money. And I always thought, well, at least they're approaching it like a business and whatever. I mean, both ways are great. But
hey, hacky sack on the Great Lawn at 3.
So I think they think about the whole of their business as they're going forward and the things that they say. And they know that they won't get the book sales or even the publisher They won't get the speaking engagements. They won't be invited to the conventions that if they are one of the prominent names listed by certain organizations and they're paid to be part of those organizations, they're going to lose those opportunities. And they fundamentally don't want to lose their money-making income. And they make a lot of money on the right. I mean, they make millions and millions of dollars. So there's a lot to lose. So I think that's what's driving most of it.
Please clap.